Welcome in, latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on the Twitter machine. And there he is, the Dean, Athlon Sports Senior Editor, Stephen Lassan, back for another episode. And this time he's going to make some picks. How's it going, Stephen?
Mike, it's going great. We're one day closer to game day. We got the full month of October, an awesome slate of games coming up this weekend and beyond in the SEC. Don't let anybody tell you that it's a bad weekend in college football. Whenever there's college football on, it's a good weekend, even if we don't have a bunch of ranked matchups.
Yeah, and I mean, all week, Stephen, I've been kind of like rattling my head, just trying to pick what is the best game. I can't even put my finger on it because I think you can legitimately make a case for maybe every game outside of Alabama Vanderbilt as being one that could go down to the wire. Would you agree with that?
I think so. You know, I think individually, like each game has something interesting just because there's so many storylines like Florida, UCF. There's all the coach watch. You've got South Carolina and Ole Miss trying to bounce back. You've got the big one in College Station, seeing Tennessee on the road. It feels like nationally, these may not resonate, but within the SEC and within each team, it feels like there really is something to watch this weekend. And we're still at that point where, hey, this conference play just started. So we're just starting to learn a lot more about these teams. So I'm always eager to learn, eager to watch a weekend of college football and see what we can figure out about these teams.
And they're saying, where's the milkman? The milkman, he'll be on. So Wednesday night's always a doubleheader. We got Stephen making his predictions for the weekend to come. And then Cousin Shane and I will be doing a mailbag here in about an hour is when that'll start. So before we get to it, Stephen, as always, got to remind the folks, we are brought to you by MyBookie. MyBookie, the online sports book. Head on over to mybookie.ag today. Put in that promo code, that SEC. That's THATSEC. MyBookie's those are the lines we're using. Stephen, he got his MyBookie lock of the week wrong last week, as did I, as did Shane. So if nothing else that teaches us, it's just fade our picks. We don't know what the heck we're talking about.
Yeah, fade us. I think Cousin Shane's probably been like the most accurate so far. Isn't that true? So maybe consider like Shane's picks with a little bit more weight than ours. But Mike, we're almost at the midpoint of the season, so we've got to pick this up a little bit. I mean, we owe the Cousins some W's to be able to stack that bank account because you know what's coming. You got Thanksgiving, you got Christmas. You might have to pay for that engagement ring. So we got to help stack some W's here.
And when Cousin Shay's the most accurate, you know we are in trouble. You know what I mean? Like usually he's just awful. But
we can't lose to the milkman, right?
No. I hope that name catches on, the milkman. Hey, before we get going, man, what a guy. JR, Cousin JR, appreciate you, brother. He just gifted a membership to the Aggie. So we'll see if the Aggie's fired up about who Steven's picking in the game of the week here in the SEC. But before we get to that, Steven, we also like to do our prize picks selections each and every week here on the channel. If you're unfamiliar with Prize Picks, it is the go-to site for daily fantasy sports. It's not just college football. They got all the sports covered, but we like to partner with Prize Picks because they have the college football selections, and there's a ton to pick from. And if you go over to Prize Picks, sign up for an account, use the promo code SEC. If you play a $5 wager, they'll give you $50 instantly. So it's very simple. It's daily fantasy. You're just selecting. They have yards, rushing, passing, receiving for a ton of players. And all you have to do is pick more than or less than. So, Steven, I sent you over all these Prize Picks options. Which ones are you most confident about looking ahead to the weekend?
So I think we have quite a few solid Prize Picks options out there. So we went 2-1 last week. Let's try to go undefeated this week. We're going to start with that Missouri Texas A&M showdown. And I've got two plays on the Missouri side. One of those is Brady Cook. He is 0.5 in interceptions. So basically, do you think he throws one or he doesn't? Texas A&M has picked off 7 passes this year. So I'm going to play the more than side of that prize pick. So give me Brady Cook, 0.5 interceptions. Give me the more than side. Also, give me the more than side of Luther Burden. He is at 68.5. It's a tough spot on the road, but I think you look at his production in the last couple games, coming off the off week. Missouri hopefully figured out that big play passing game. 1 or 2 long plays can get you there. So that's the Missouri side of things. On the Texas A&M side, I like Randy Bond. He's one. It sounds like a Big Ten podcast now. 1.5 field goals made. I'm going to go with more than. A&M's got, he's attempted 11 field goals this year, so I'm going to take the more than side in a game where I think points could be at a premium. So give me the more than side on Randy Bond's field goals.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, Stephen, because again, I just threw up the statistics. I'm going to throw up here again. But Brady's only got 1 interception on the season. But again, they've not faced anyone of A&M's caliber. They've not been on the road yet. So I'm not saying I disagree with that take, but it'll be interesting to see if Brady Cook's throwing picks. Well, yeah, I get it. You're just saying 1 for the prize picks, but if he throws multiple, I don't think Missouri's got a shot in this game. If he throws 1, they still got a shot, but it would be now we're getting into dicey arenas here. You know what?
Absolutely. And I think there's a ton of just interest in sort of how this game sets up because A&M's defensive front really maybe started to come on in that Arkansas game. So how does Missouri handle that? And kind of just playing the averages with this one, just seeing that A&M has been so good at intercepting passes. I mean, you could also pinpoint some of the quarterbacks they face have not been the greatest. But at the same time, I think just the track record there, and even though Cook has been efficient on the road, A&M's defensive line, you just got to get 1 to hit that. So that's why I like that in the prize picks on the more than side this week.
Mm-hmm. And you also made note earlier in the week just how important cashing in on red zone opportunities will be for Missouri, for A&M. That will likely dictate the game. But again, Randy Bond, he's been kicking them because A&M's not been converting down there at an incredibly high rate. So I do like that pick. Was that the only 3 selections you got this week on the prize picks?
Let's go over to the Auburn and Georgia game because I got a few for you over there. Let's take Dominic Lovett. He is at 54.5 receiving yards. I think we saw this the last couple weeks that he's starting to kind of maybe potentially grow into that number 1 role. I am going to take the more than side of this for Georgia. Maybe Georgia offensively in the second half of Alabama found itself. Carson Beck is at 278.5 in the passing yards. On the fence about that one, but I like Dominic Lovett to go over the 54.5 receiving yards. And for Auburn, let's play 2 options here. We've got Peyton Thorne, 0.5 interceptions. I'm going to take the more than side. I think Georgia can pick off a pass here. And let's take Keandre Lambert-Smith. He's only at 38.5 receiving yards. If you look at the spread, and if you believe it, Auburn's going to be behind. They're going to be throwing a lot. We saw this last week, too, with Peyton Thorne. Maybe he found a little offensive rhythm outside of the interception. So I like the way Lambert-Smith has played. And in a matchup where they could be behind in throwing, I think there's an opportunity. So more than 38.5 receiving yards for Keandre Lambert-Smith.
Yeah, and I don't mean to throw Peyton Thorne under the bus any more than his head coach has or anything. But, I mean, outside of Alabama A&M in the opener, I believe he's had at least 1 interception in every game this year. So, that feels like a gimme this week against on the first road trip for Auburn of the season playing mighty Georgia. They may have to change that one before the Cousins go over there and just bombard prize picks. You know what?
Rumor has it that some of the lines in the SEC games have moved after this podcast and your podcast with Shane on Thursday has been recorded. So,
right. All right. So, is that it for the prize pick selections this week, Stephen?
That is. Let's hope those are all winners for the Cousins out there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of better be a winner, Stephen. Oh, wait, real quick. Shout out. Cousin James just became a member of the channel. Appreciate you, brother. But speaking of better win, let's go with the only non-conference matchup on the slate here, Stephen, as we predict these games. Central Florida at Florida. And why I say must win, well, certainly Florida must win this, but Billy Napier got to get this one, Stephen, to where's it at now? I mean, Central Florida favored by 2.5 points, over under 62 points. And I think I just realized, Stephen, I told you incorrectly. I think this morning I told you Florida was favored, but sadly, I think I was just stunned because I couldn't believe a team of this caliber could be favored in the SEC, in the swamp. But that's what it is. Central Florida is the favorite, not Miami. That is still stunning to me. Thoughts on this matchup, Stephen?
Mike, I think the first thing that jumps out to me is this has to be, I don't, maybe Billy Napier's like last stand might be a little bit dramatic here, but
I
it
think
does.
he's already had a couple of them.
If there's any chance that they turn this thing around, it has to start here. You can't lose to UCF, and you certainly can't get embarrassed at home against UCF like Florida did against Miami and Texas A&M. So it is a must-win game for Florida at home, coming off the off week. On the other side of things, and I think this is something I'm having a hard time kind of grasping, is UCF had the off week, then they lost to Colorado in pretty surprising fashion. They were a 2-touchdown favorite and got beat pretty handily by Colorado. So I'm trying to figure out, was UCF just really amped up for Florida and overlooking Colorado? Either way, the storylines in this game are pretty massive because UCF probably really wants a piece of Florida because they don't get to play the big three in Florida very often. So I suspect that we're going to see a very high scoring game. Both of these defenses give up a lot of yards. You mentioned the over under, it's up there. When you look at UCF, the strength of this team is running the ball. RJ Harvey, KJ Jefferson, they have Kobe Hudson at receiver. They have a lot of transfers and some transfers from the SEC. They can score it. For some reason, Gus Malzahn made the decision to pay Ted Roof to be his defensive coordinator. As you can imagine, that is not going very well. I mentioned this on the Monday show. Their rush defense is good. I will also point to you the opponents that they played, TCU and Colorado and Sam Houston at the FBS level, do not run the ball very well. So you also note that UCF gave up 400 passing yards to TCU a few weeks ago. So what I'm getting at is this should be a very high-scoring game, and I think you're going to see a lot of fireworks on both sides. Mike, I picked Florida to beat Miami like a total idiot in the season opener. I'm going to do it again. So, by the spreads, small upset. Give me Florida 34, UCF 31.
Ooh, man. Down to the wire. Yeah, it'd be interesting, Stephen. But would your pick have changed at all if Florida didn't have 2 weeks to prepare and UCF was not coming off a tough loss? Like let's say it was role reversal. Let's say Florida was coming off a tough loss and Central Florida had 2 weeks to prepare. Would your pick change at all?
Potentially. I think what was probably the most alarming for me for UCF is just how they played last week against Colorado. And that's kind of what's guiding me here is I like the fact that Florida is off the off week. And I've had 2 weeks to get ready for this game. Matchup wise, there's a lot of things in here that don't favor Florida, but really that game last week against UCF was really surprising. I mean, it's against Colorado to be a 2-touchdown favorite and struggle like that against Colorado was pretty alarming to me for UCF. So it's kind of a little bit of both.
And I guess it kind of goes without saying, Stephen, but for those that don't know, they're probably tired of us talking about Florida's schedule. But after Central Florida, at Tennessee, Kentucky at home, Georgia and Jacksonville, at Texas, LSU at home, Ole Miss at home, and at Florida State. If Central Florida goes down here and scores, I know you said like low 30s, but let's say it's high 30s to low 40s. What is going to happen the rest of this schedule? Because I'm not sitting here saying that's going to happen, but it's not that unrealistic either, I don't think.
I mean, maybe this is too bold, but I don't see, other than maybe the Florida State game, I don't know where Florida will be favored the rest of the year. And to your point, I mean, the offense is Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss. I mean, that's 4 or 5 of the best in the SEC right there. So if they struggle against UCF, and UCF has a good offense with some of the firepower that they have, I mean, that's just spells even more bad things to come for this defense going forward in the SEC.
Mm-hmm. And then we just basically have to do this, I guess, every week until it happens. If Central Florida pulls off the upset, is Billy Napier the head coach of Florida by Monday?
I would get rid of him. That's just my personal belief. But I think if you're looking at kind of the schedule, that gap between Kentucky and Georgia, they have another off week on October 26th, probably makes the most sense if you're going to change coaches. Like by then, you know for sure that the chances of a winning season are pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
But the other point is kind of hard to decipher is Florida's administrative things. Like is Scott Strickland for sure going to make the next hire, president, interim? There's a lot of factors in this one. It wouldn't surprise me to maybe see this kind of drag out to later in the season.
Mm-hmm. All right, Stephen, let's kick it over to the next game on the docket here. Now we get into conference play. All the rest of these games are conference games, Stephen. We got Alabama at Vanderbilt, 3:15 Central Time, SEC Network. Alabama favored by 23 points and over under 55.5 total points. Thoughts on this matchup?
I think Clark Lee pretty much telegraphed what Vanderbilt's upset path is going to be. It's going to have to be a very low possession game, and also kind of counting on keeping Jalen Milroe on the sidelines, using Diego Pavia, using Ced Alexander, control the time of possession. Don't give Jalen Milroe the ball, 14 possessions, because if you're Vanderbilt, your path to an upset has to be sort of like turnovers. It has to be things just breaking your way. And plus you're controlling the pace of the game, kind of like they did against Virginia Tech early on. The Hokies came back in the second half, and kind of the way they were able to play Missouri, sort of a lower scoring game. That's asking a lot, though, I think, for this Vanderbilt team. They are catching Alabama at the right time, though, coming off of the win against Georgia. The fact that Vanderbilt's had 2 weeks to prepare. If you're Clark Lee, this is sort of a chance to sort of show that, hey, we've made a lot of progress in a very short amount of time. So Vanderbilt basically needs to pitch a perfect game to win here. They're going to need some mistakes by Alabama. I just don't see it. I think Alabama, it may start slow, maybe some early letdown, but they pull away in the second half. So give me Alabama 45, Vanderbilt 17.
Man, no respect for them Commodores, Steven. Okay. They're going to play ball control. They're going to need Diego Pavia to hit some big plays. They're going to have to prevent Alabama from hitting big plays, which they seemingly do at will. But, yeah, I can't. I'm just trying to manufacture ways for this to be competitive. I can't really do it.
I think maybe the other factor is Vanderbilt has played, they've played obviously Missouri. They played Virginia Tech. They played them, both were one possession games, even in a loss to Missouri. Obviously they blew out Alcorn, and they should have beat Georgia State if they played a little better game today. So, I mean, they've played, two, I think, pretty solid power conference teams, and one solid one in Virginia Tech and one top 10 to 15 team in Missouri, and they sort of punched above their weight. They covered the spread in both. So there's your path, I think. It's just everything has to go right. Pavia's got to play an unbelievable game. They've got to have some turnovers. That's asking a lot, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, another one that may be asking a lot here, Stephen. Auburn at Georgia. This one will be 2:30 Central Time kickoff, ABC. Georgia favored by 24 points over under. I have it as 52. Who do you like in this showdown? Which, heck, it was close last year. This was a tremendous rivalry. But that's just like a nice way of saying Georgia should win big. But I don't know. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, the last time, 3 times these teams have played in Athens, it has been a 32, 21, and 17. Those are those point spreads by Georgia's margin of victory in those games. So it has been pretty one-sided for Georgia. But it's great to get into conference play and get the Deep South's oldest rivalry going, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite games every year. At least when they're competitive, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's the big question for me is just how competitive this game will be, given the sort of margin of victory in recent years.
Well, let me ask you this though, Stephen, because at what point? Again, I get it. It was Alabama. They may be the best team in the country for all I know. They look like it for about a quarter Saturday night. But and again, all of a sudden, Kentucky looks really good. But at what point do we become concerned a little bit about Georgia and their slow starts? And again, maybe Jalen Milroe, Kalen DeBoer, that may be the best quarterback coach combo in the country, and certainly Auburn does not have at least the head coach there. I'm not going to call out the players, but I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into one result, but you know, if it's a slow start, if this is like Kentucky 2.0, are you going to start to be concerned?
Yeah, I will be. And I think you asked me a question on Monday about, are you more worried about Carson Beck or the Georgia defense? And I thought about that a little bit more over the last couple of days. And I think I would actually kind of change my opinion a little bit. I probably would go with the defense. And certainly the slow starts offensively are a concern. But what happens here if Auburn has success moving the ball? It is way more competitive than sort of the recent scores. And then you get into a question of, okay, it's a trend. You know, Alabama, Auburn, they've now had the slow starts offensively. Like, there are some flaws here that we're trying to learn a little bit more about Georgia. But, you know, the main storyline I think here is how motivated does Georgia come out and play? You know, they should be motivated to come out fast start. They should be able to control Auburn. I mean, just the way that these two teams are ranked, the way the recent series history has been. But on the other side of things for Auburn, what Auburn are we going to get? Are we going to get the one that last year pushed Alabama and Georgia to the brink? Are we going to get the one that lost to New Mexico and California? So inconsistency for Auburn, trying to figure out where they are versus the motivation for Georgia is kind of a big storyline for me in this game. I think I will be interested to see how does Auburn and Peyton Thorne and these receivers attack the secondary for Georgia? Because, you know, obviously Alabama had some success there. And we've seen, I mean, Auburn has a very high success rate on offense. It's just that they're turning the ball over and penalties and sort of catastrophic things. So everything here says that it should be a Georgia blowout, right? I mean, the other side of it is we've seen what Hugh Freeze has done at Auburn and playing top-ranked teams close. Oddly enough, when you go to rush defense in the SEC, you got to scroll all the way down to 14th to find Georgia. So they're off to us, you know, continuing our questions about the Georgia defense early in the year. So if I'm Auburn, it's got to be Jarquez Hunter, a lot of staying out of third and longs, limiting the mistakes, try to keep it close to the fourth quarter. I'm going to take Georgia 38, Auburn 17. So it's a small cover for Auburn, but I think Georgia shows up with a little bit more motivation and a better defensive effort early on than we saw against Alabama.
Would a stunning Auburn upset completely change the narrative on Hugh Freeze and the direction of his program, or would you sit here and still be wondering how bright the future is?
I think it helps. I think the question is what comes after the Georgia upset. Like, is there going to be another surprising loss somewhere along the way? You know, after Georgia, they get Missouri and Kentucky and Vanderbilt. So it's a tough stretch. I mean, it would certainly change the narrative for a week for Hugh Freeze in Auburn. But I think, again, you want to see more consistency from this Auburn team. And I'm just not sure that this team is ready to do that.
Mm-hmm. But again, Peyton Thorne, I mean, I thought he played his best football last week until obviously the critical error. I mean, if we could just move on from that, is there any hope? And this may just be like diehard fan logic, Stephen, but because you always want to play at home. It's such an advantage, but they played 5 straight at home, and I would imagine they're not very popular on the Plains right now, based on the 2-3 start. Any way that going on the road and us against the world mentality that could actually be beneficial to Auburn this week?
Yeah, I think it could. If nothing else, you get away from a home crowd that's probably antsy and eager to boo, especially with the way they played the last couple of weeks. So the sort of like the last thing you need would be another performance that's shaky offensively with more turnovers and just continuing the same thing. On the road at Georgia, I think the outcome is kind of expected, right? I mean, the odds makers favor Georgia pretty heavily there. And I think you would have to be pretty optimistic to find a path to Auburn winning outside of, well, Carson Beck gets off to a slow start. Maybe Auburn has a turnover or two. They score on defense early. And then maybe Georgia or maybe Auburn just pushes around Georgia. And that's kind of what I was getting at with the rush defense stat is we saw Kentucky do this. I mean, if you're Auburn, one of the ways to win this game is to shorten it. And so I would get Jarquez Hunter, Peyton Thorne's rushing involved. And again, I think it's asking a lot, and it's asking to be really optimistic about that scenario. But yeah, playing away from Auburn playing on the road at Georgia might actually be an advantage considering all that's transpired there the last couple of weeks.
And remember last year, Stephen, it was Peyton Thorne on a couple big runs that really gashed Georgia. That was, the two best plays that I can recall that Auburn had against Georgia. Now, obviously, it wasn't enough to win, but why Georgia won that football game is because they had Brock Bowers, and they just fed the beast, kept feeding them, and that's how they won. They don't got him obviously anymore. You know what?
Yeah, and as you mentioned that, I'm thinking back to last week's game for Alabama Georgia, and I'm wondering if you're Georgia defending Jalen Milroe, and obviously they're not the same player, but some of those runs to the outside that Peyton Thorne did so well with last year in this game, if you sort of got your defense in rhythm in the second half and maybe how to control some of those things. So maybe, between playing Alabama, now the Auburn game, maybe some of those things, some of the issues we've seen Georgia defensively, maybe they kind of get cleaned up this week, much like we saw in the second half against Alabama.
Mm-hmm. All right, now we're getting into the meat of the action here, Stephen. Cousin Shane, I think he's just tuned in just to hear your pick. Tennessee at Arkansas, Stephen. It's going to be the night game on ABC's 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central. Tennessee, 13.5-point favorite, over under 59.5 points. Who you like in this one, Stephen?
Mike, I like Tennessee. And I know it's a tough spot for Tennessee going into Fayetteville on Saturday night, but I think the mistakes that we've seen Arkansas, if they can clean those up, they got a chance here because I think Taylor Green can always create some chaos in a matchup like this. But one thing I do worry about is the Arkansas offensive line against the Tennessee defensive line. I think that is a huge advantage for the Vols.
And did you catch that clip? I posted it. We played it on the show yesterday, but they were asking Sam Pittman about Tennessee's outscored opponents 78-3 in the first quarter. And that is not an outlier. That's essentially what they've done the entire time under Josh Heupel. So how important will it be, I think, for both teams really, Stephen, for Tennessee to get off to a fast start, quiet the crowd, and just kind of start leaning on the Razorbacks? Meanwhile, the importance for Arkansas to prevent that, to keep the crowd in the game and keep it competitive. How big will that be in determining the outcome?
Yeah, it's going to be huge. And I think when you start thinking about like an Arkansas upset here and kind of going back to what we just mentioned about the mistakes, it's the penalties, it's the turnovers, it's succeeding on third down, offense and defense. You've got to find a way to do the small things right. But if you want to win this game, one way to do it is to keep the crowd in it. So you get off to that fast start. Maybe Taylor Green has a big touchdown run. Maybe he hits a big pass like he did against Texas A&M, and you keep the crowd in it. You slow down Tennessee offensively so they don't get out to that fast start, because Tennessee can just avalanche you. And it's whether it's defensive stops, like I said, their defensive line has a huge advantage on paper coming into this game against the Arkansas offensive line. And also whether it's big plays in the passing game, maybe they can create a turnover. If Tennessee gets ahead by 14 or so, I think it's tough to see Arkansas coming back. So I think my path to an upset here for Arkansas is, like you said, you get off to a fast start, you do the small things right. The rush defense of Arkansas kind of keeps Dylan Sampson in check. Maybe you pressure Nico on third downs, kind of like Oklahoma did. You force a turnover. You know, the crowd being on the road, he has been he's human. He created, he gave away a couple turnovers against NC State and Oklahoma. So there's a path there for Arkansas, but it requires all those small things going right. It requires a fast start. It requires winning in the trenches. And so I'm going to take Tennessee 34, Arkansas 17.
Mm.
And that is my lock of the week.
Oh, you just cursed the balls. Way to go, Steven. Way to go. But, hey, how about this? I asked Shane this earlier, yesterday, I think it was. If Tennessee were to beat Arkansas, who cares what the score is, just, even by 1 point, if they're turn around and they beat Florida, I think they're going to the college football playoff because I think they'll beat everyone other than Georgia and Alabama. And heck, I think given what we've seen from Georgia, that's no longer is that a gimme for Georgia. I still heavily favor Georgia, but not a gimme. And then Alabama, I don't know if I'd quite call that a toss-up. I think I would certainly lean Alabama, even though it is in Neyland Stadium. But basically what I'm saying is I think they're 10-2 lock if they can beat Arkansas and get over their Florida curse. What's your thoughts on that? Would you agree?
Yes, I would. I think 10-2 gets Tennessee in the playoff. And I think just kind of thinking about their schedule, if Tennessee was to lose to Alabama and Georgia, the likelihood of both of those being in the top 5 or top 10 this year is still very, very high. And also kind of like we talked about with the bubble, it's looking pretty soft right now. I mean, it doesn't mean it's going to change a lot in the next couple of weeks. And certainly we'll see what happens with Clemson out of the ACC, who's starting to find some momentum. But 10-2 for Tennessee. And also keep in mind that what if Missouri loses this weekend? What if Ole Miss is unable to get back in there? That's really good news for Tennessee. So, to your point, if Tennessee's 10-2, they're in the college football playoff.
Now, let's flip it the other way, though, Stephen. If Arkansas pulls off a stunning upset, your words, not mine, because you're lock of the week here. I'm just kidding. But if they were able to do, what most people will not expect them to do, if they pull off the upset here, to me that completely changes the narrative. If you tell me Arkansas can beat Tennessee at home, I think they can beat LSU at home. I'm not saying they will, but they can. I think they could beat Ole Miss at home. Hell, Ole Miss could be in shambles. This is after they play South Carolina, LSU. I mean, there's a lot of teams here. Could a win in Fayetteville Saturday night completely change the narrative on Sam Pittman on these Arkansas Razorbacks? And I have to believe if Tennessee is your 4th win of the season, you are a lock for the postseason bare minimum.
Absolutely. I mean, if Arkansas beats Tennessee on Saturday night, we're talking about a team that's 4-2 and could easily be 6-0 at this point. And they're going into the off week where they will get a chance to sort of regroup and get ready for LSU. And so to your point, LSU is winnable. Ole Miss, depending on how they rebound, is winnable. Texas looks pretty tough, but Arkansas greeted the Longhorns a few years ago in Fayetteville very rudely. So I'm sure they will welcome their new SEC brethren to Fayetteville with a warm welcome on November 16th. So I do think there is a chance here for Arkansas to sort of flip the narrative and head into that off week with momentum, kind of at the halfway point of the season. There's no question. It is a huge opportunity for Sam Pittman. It means a ton, potentially for where kind of the direction of his coaching tenure goes here in Fayetteville. So a lot at stake. I just think when you look at some of the matchups here, Tennessee's defensive line against Arkansas's offensive front, can they get Jaquindon Jackson going? Just Tennessee can hurt you so many different ways. We've seen Arkansas in these moments where they've played Oklahoma State, they've played Texas A&M. They've had those small mistakes in those games, and they're going to have to play even better, I think, on Saturday night to win this game.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, Stephen, you don't want to be completely one-dimensional, particularly on the road in this conference night game. But I think Tennessee can win this being one-dimensional one way or another, whether it's pass-heavy, run-heavy. If Arkansas cannot run the ball and is one-dimensional, I don't think they got a shot in this one. Do you?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think they are going to need some balance, and balance especially because as explosive as Taylon Green can be running the ball and through the air as well, he can be a little streaky as a passer. As we've seen some of the accuracy levels dip to like 40%. So you could win with that, but I think you're going to need that balance. Like everything on this Arkansas offense starts with getting Jaquindon Jackson going, and you can play off of that. So it requires Taylon Green to have a huge night. It requires being able to get Jaquindon Jackson going, because I don't think you want to ask Taylon Green to be consistently trying to win 3rd and 9, 3rd and 8 all night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to your point, Taylon Green, he's currently 16th in the SEC in completion percentage and touchdown to interception ratio. But let me just tell you, Stephen, Tennessee struggles against these damn quarterbacks that can run, and he can run with the best of them. So just keep that in your back pocket. Hey, before we move on to the final games here, Stephen, we got a donation here from I can't say that. Chiochin. I appreciate you, brother. However you say your name. Here's a question, Stephen, though. With the point spread already looking ahead, of course, Texas and Oklahoma are off, so it's fair that they're looking ahead. Would the point spread be any different if Quinn Ewers versus Arch Manning is named the starter for Texas against Oklahoma? In your mind, does that change the spread at all?
Man, that's a really good question. I probably maybe you give Texas a little bit of a bump. No, I don't think a ton. Am I crazy? Like, it feels like a couple points maybe in favor of Ewers, just because more experience going up against a good Oklahoma defense.
Right. Yeah. Arch may be the media's gift to football. You know what I mean? But I think in the odds makers, they would give a slight nod. Not a ton, but maybe 3 points if it's announced Ewers 100% good to go. I think that's worth a couple points.
Yeah, I think his experience, and I think Manning certainly brings probably a little bit more rushing ability to the offense, but I also think Arch Manning hasn't done very much wrong in his first couple starts. But I think the fact that Ewers went on the road and carved up a very good Michigan defense a few weeks ago, and just his X amount of starts experience over the last couple of years is super valuable in a matchup like this. So I would probably maybe like 2 or 3 points in favor of Texas. I think whether it was Arch or whether it was Ewers, I think Texas would be favored either way.
Mm-hmm. All right, Stephen, let's get into the two big ones here. Let's do Ole Miss at South Carolina. Stephen, South Carolina's had 2 weeks to prepare. Ole Miss coming off a heart-wrenching loss here. We've got, I think I sent you the wrong one here. I apologize, Stephen. It was early when I sent you these spreads, but I think you knew where I was going with this. Ole Miss favored by 9, and the over-under 53.5 points. I mistakenly told Stephen South Carolina was favored, but I'm pretty sure he put 2 and 2 together there. But again, thoughts on this matchup, Stephen? This could be the best game of the weekend here in the SEC.
Absolutely. I think it is a potentially make or break game for the Ole Miss Rebels and their season, just because of what happened last week and they lost. Can they regroup? Can they get back in the mix to be a college football playoff team? It starts with this week against South Carolina, because I bet South Carolina is going to do a lot of similar things that Kentucky did last week. They're going to use that defensive front to pressure Jackson Dart. They're going to use that front to try to slow down the rushing game, get him in 3rd and longs, and then try to get sacks with Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard. And then offensively, whether it's Robbie Ashford or Lenore Sellers, I suspect that they would try to turn this into a low possession, sort of lower scoring game. 20-17 last week for Ole Miss really helped Kentucky. That's the kind of style of game that South Carolina needs to play. So I am very interested to see how Ole Miss responds, because there has to be a sense of urgency on the road, because they're still going to have to play LSU. They still got to play Georgia. They still got some tough matchups ahead. On the other side of things, for South Carolina, here's another opportunity to get a marquee win at home. They fell just short against LSU. They have some of the ingredients that Kentucky was able to deploy against Ole Miss. So I'm interested just to see the styles and the fight, because if South Carolina does exactly what Kentucky did last week, there's a very good chance they pull off the upset here. So a ton of intrigue for me in this matchup. I'm going to go Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin to rebound, 31, South Carolina 24.
Ooh, so still a close matchup though. And we still don't know officially. We'll have the official injury reports will be out later this evening. We'll be sure to share that as soon as it becomes public. But still don't know the availability of Sellers and Rocket Sanders, so that could certainly change things. But yeah, I mean, this is a difficult place to play, and I know South Carolina's not on anybody's radar right now in terms of college football playoff, but they could get there, Steven, if they keep on winning, right? I mean, let's pull up their schedule. They got some, again, this would be a great win. Alabama, I mean, that'll be difficult. But let's take Alabama off the table because it's at Alabama. Again, not saying you can't do it, but that would seemingly be too tough. If you were to tell me that South Carolina is good enough to beat Ole Miss, I think every other game is winnable aside from at Alabama. And if we're 10-2 here, we're South Carolina, I think they're making the playoff. What would be your thoughts on that?
I think so too. It's kind of funny to think about that because, go back to the preseason, like South Carolina was, 5.5, 6 wins, kind of the win total. But there really is an opportunity here for this team. If they can beat Ole Miss on Saturday, let's just say, like you said, they lose to Alabama. I mean, a lot of these games feel very much in toss-up territory. If you're beating Ole Miss, then all of a sudden A&M, Missouri, certainly Clemson look more winnable on the schedule. So there's another. It's the same thing for South Carolina. As much as Ole Miss's playoff hopes are certainly on the line, the same thing is like if South Carolina would be considered a long shot now, if they win on Saturday, they certainly have to. And they already have the win over Kentucky and a close loss to LSU. That resume is starting to look a lot closer to kind of a bubble team if they keep winning.
Now, on the flip side, Stephen, and certainly based on your prediction, I think you would agree with this sentiment that, again, this is college football. Crazy things happen. And not that Kentucky stole one from Ole Miss because, quite frankly, they whipped them on the line of scrimmage. They made the plays. Ole Miss did not. Ole Miss did not deserve to win last weekend. Kentucky did deserve to win, and therefore they obviously did. But it seems like you're not overreacting to one loss. We realize the importance of this game. The season's on the line. But if Ole Miss plays like they're capable of playing, if they can make some more plays, as long as they don't go 1 for 10 on third down again or something crazy like that, could it be that we're just sitting back, let's say, in early December and say, man, I don't know what happened at Kentucky week, but they just, maybe that was like a wake up call after playing all these cupcakes to start the season, and that spur Ole Miss to a big run here.
You always see this every year. There are some games we look back like in December and go, what the heck happened in that game? Like, how did they win? I don't necessarily know if that's going to be the case, but I do think, and I'm trying, and maybe I'm underreacting. I'm also seeing that Ole Miss was, if they can just do, block a little bit better, if they can finish drives a little bit better. I know it's on the road at South Carolina. I think they can rebound this week. And also, I think the urgency angle comes into this week. I mean, they played 4 really easy opponents, then they stepped up in competition and fell short. Well, if they want to meet the goals of the last dance and all that, you've got to win on Saturday because otherwise, at this point, still to play Georgia and some of those other opponents on the schedule. 2 losses already, and that sort of high expectations and hopes start to crumble real quick. So I didn't sell my Ole Miss stock. I kind of downgraded them a little bit. I'm kind of expecting them to bounce back this week, though.
Right. And could there be any, I don't know if motivation is the right word, but just, they were deemed as a playoff lock seemingly by most people, myself included, a week ago. Then you drop this, and now I'm seeing, just look at the comments, Stephen. Oh, they're frauds. They're garbage. They shouldn't even been ranked, yada, yada, yada. Instead of people patting them on the back, they're kicking them in the ass. I mean, could that that get the best Ole Miss showing here on Saturday?
It can, and it should, because if they lose this game, uh, I really wonder about where this could go. Because when you start thinking about NIL and transfers and a team that's just been brought together, and you now have 2 losses at this point of the season, your playoff hopes get pretty bleak, and you would have to really run the table, and that would be asking this Ole Miss team to be perfect the rest of the way, which seems hard based upon what we saw on Saturday. But I also think they could just play a lot better too. And if they lose this game, we start probably talking about, like you said, fraud watch, Lane Kiffin's future. What does the roster look like next year? So there is a ton of questions, and it all feels like it's only the first weekend in October, but it really feels like this weekend is a clear kind of fork in the road for this Ole Miss team as it tries to go to the college football playoff.
Mm-hmm. All right, final matchup here, Stephen. Missouri on the road at Texas A&M here. This is going to be the early game. Could make the case should be the night game, but nonetheless, A&M favored by 2.5 points. Over unders 48.5 is going to be on ABC, 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern time. Stephen, he told me before we were airing, he's torn. The torn can be no more. You must make a decision. Who's winning this game?
What Mike doesn't know is I am holding a piece of paper that does not have a prediction on it. It is blank. So this is going to be an in the moment. It's going to be a vibes pick, if you will. I'm actually glad it's early, because I am just ready to get this game started, because I have absolutely no idea what to expect on Saturday, because it feels like you could make a really compelling case for either team to win this game. Also, just thinking ahead for playoff purposes, if A&M can win this game, all of a sudden they're back in the conversation after the loss to Notre Dame. If you're Missouri, it's, survive and advance. That has been the big thing. It doesn't really matter sometimes how you win. You just have to win, and you can figure it out as you go. So Missouri's had 2 close games. Now they're going on the road for the first time. I'm curious to see just how they play. They've had 2 weeks to get ready. A&M has played a couple SEC opponents now. They've had the close game last week against Arkansas. So you do wonder, coming off a rivalry game, going home, Missouri, 2 weeks to get ready, who's got the upper hand kind of in the psychological battle there. But I think we're in for a really close game on Saturday, because Mike, you and I talked about this on Monday. These 2 teams are not hitting big plays, and they cannot finish drives in the red zone. They are kicking a lot of field goals. So it feels like which team is going to be able to finish drives and which team is able to hit on a big play or two. And some of that is going to have to be getting Brady Cook back to Brady Cook that we saw last season. So this is a 100% toss up in my mind. Mike, do you have any thoughts before I give my pick?
Would the pick change if it was a night game at Kyle Field as opposed to an 11 a.m. kick?
Probably, yeah. Well, actually, yeah. I'd probably feel a little bit better about A&M, but I'm also sitting here saying I picked A&M to beat Notre Dame, and maybe that's way into the back of my mind. And it was at night too.
And again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I think it's truthful to ask, how elite of a home field does A&M have? I know they have a tremendous fan base, tremendous stadium, but I don't know. They seem to. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of many games that really. I know they beat Alabama there a couple years ago, so again, they're certainly capable of winning big games there. But I just when you say like the top 5 toughest places to play in the SEC, at A&M, I don't know if they're in that top 5.
It will, because Mike Elko is going to turn it into that. He's not going to squander all his talent like Jimbo Fisher. If that's your answer to that one. A couple other kind of keys here. A&M's rush defense dominated Arkansas last week. And so I want to see Missouri's offensive line match up with Nick Scorton and Shamar Stewart, because it does feel like at home with that pass rush, A&M's going to have some chances there if they can get Missouri sort of behind the chains and they're not hitting big plays. So this is a toss-up, Mike. I'm gonna go Missouri 27, A&M 24. Total toss-up.
Right. It's going to come down to one of these dreaded field goals,
Right.
it sounds like.
Man, it's like you said, it's like a Big Ten podcast here. Iowa and Purdue geared up for us with, but no, this, like I said, I have searched, for different, a reason to pick both teams, and I like the home field advantage for A&M. Even acknowledging what you said about the home field there for A&M, it also feels like the A&M defensive line could just take control here. But also, Missouri's defense has been really good. I know they've played BC and Vanderbilt so far, and they held Thomas Castellanos in check, and Diego Pavia had 84 rushing yards. So just thinking of how A&M needs to attack this game with Le'Veon Moss and the offensive line for Texas A&M, they've held up well against the rush so far. So maybe this is a bet that Brady Cook and Luther Burden connect on one big play, and that's the difference in a tight game.
Now, let me ask you this, Stephen, and hopefully this makes sense. If you had to give a percentage chance that Missouri makes the playoff today, you have to pick a number, 0 to 100, without knowing, heading into the A&M game. So before that's even decided, what percentage chance would you give Missouri to make the college football playoff today?
I would probably put their odds at about 40 or 50%. I think it's pretty high given their schedule and also just team strength.
And then how much does that number, if at all, it doesn't have to, but how much does that number change if I can guarantee you that they go down there and they beat A&M?
I would probably give them about 10, probably more percent. So you're probably going from like 40 to like 50-50. If you tell me that Missouri beats A&M, only loses to Alabama the rest of the way, they might be able to afford a loss like to South Carolina later this season. But I don't see many losses on that schedule if they play up to the potential that we thought in the preseason. So I think this is kind of a show me game for Brady Cook and this offense to kind of bounce back after what's been a slow start in a game that could mean a lot for the playoff positioning.
And then how about the same question for A&M? What kind of odds or percentage would you give them today of making the playoff without knowing the result of the Missouri game?
See, so Missouri is probably about 40. I'd probably go about 15 to 20%. And I think a couple reasons why. Like, first of all, they've got that loss to Notre Dame, and there's a good chance that Notre Dame is probably going to win several of their games going forward. You're going to have to probably be stuck behind them in sort of positioning. So you also have Texas, you got LSU, you got Missouri, and you got to go to South Carolina. It's just based upon the way that A&M is played. Their margin for error seems really small, at least until they can get this offense in the passing game up another level. So I would probably about 15 to 20%. And if they win on Saturday, I think you're probably bumping them to about like 30, 35.
Yeah, well, you were already ahead of me because you were answering a question I didn't even get to ask you. But the only reason I wanted to ask you that because I feel like this is not a playoff game, but one that'll kind of determine who the real playoff contender truly is. Because I don't know if both these teams are, but I certainly think that the winner will be.
I think that's definitely fair. And I think just looking at Missouri's schedule, we circled this game and we circled the Alabama game as some of the biggest tests of the season back in the offseason. And so if they can get this victory and you start to see some improvement on some of the offensive issues, and for A&M, you've already had one loss to Notre Dame, but you beat Missouri, who's ranked, top 10, top 12 in the country. All of a sudden, you can kind of start to see that Notre Dame is piecing together some wins at the end of the year. If they're 11-1, 10-2, A&M's loss to Notre Dame does not look bad at all. And there's no shame in losing to them. But if they can beat Missouri, all of a sudden they're going to climb probably into the top, I would say 15 or so on Sunday for the rankings.
And it's safe to say, just based on your indecisiveness, that this is the game you're least confident in of all the games here in the SEC this weekend?
100%. It is. I literally changed my prediction probably every day this week, and probably just when you and I were just talking now too.
Okay, perfect. So again, that should just give you guys an indication of what a great weekend it could be in the SEC. I don't think short of maybe Alabama, Vanderbilt. Again, I don't know that we're going to get any blowouts. So I think we could have 5 games that really come down to the wire, and I hope we do. But hey, Stephen, before we jump off here, as always, can you tell the folks how to follow you and how to find your work?
Absolutely. You can check out all my work at athlonsports.com. You can follow me on Twitter at AthlonSteven and Stephen L. CFB on Facebook and Instagram.
All right. So thanks, Stephen, for coming by, giving us all this knowledge and all these predictions while I just get to pick them apart and laugh behind the scenes here. But hey, stay tuned because Cousin Shane's going to come on here in about 5 minutes. We're going to do a mailbag podcast. But again, can't thank you enough, Stephen. And everyone else, thank you for showing up. I'll be back in about 5 minutes.